Mic check, 1 2 1 2. Mark, just seeing if you can hear us again. Sorry, say that one more time. Okay. Mic check, 1 2. Mark, just making sure you can hear us again.
Thanks for all the help, folks.
We can hear you now. So thankful to hear your voice. Appreciate it.
Good afternoon. I would like to call to order the February 10th, 2025 Lake Washington School District Study Session. Let the record reflect that we have 4 school board members present in person and 1 present virtually. And we also have one of our student reps with us this evening, Ella. Today's topic for our study session is an early literacy update. Dr. Holman.
And it is quite appropriate that we have an early literacy update tonight, as the board is also monitoring results too. And as we think about our work related to all of the board's results policies, really one of the driving factors that we know will improve outcomes across the board for students at all levels is our early literacy program. We also know that as we think about our commitment to equity, as we think about all of our learners achieving at high levels, we know that early literacy is part and parcel with our commitment to equity, because being literate in our modern society is an essential element to living a full life. And so tonight we have Director Kelly Pease here to provide, I'll say, a well-rounded update. And we went through the presentation this morning with Kelly. We know that this could be 1,000 slides, because to truly provide a literacy update, there are so many parts and pieces to it. And so tonight is really a snapshot at early literacy. And Kelly does a nice job of really trying to pull the varied pieces into it, and just all of the work that's going into this critical aspect. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Rose and Director Pease.
Thank you. And just as a brief intro, the board has received board briefs and updates over the past several years about the work on early literacy. It has been of paramount importance to us as a district for a long time. And it's really exciting to be at a point where many pieces are rolling with some steam, and to be able to pull it together, as Dr. Holman said, in a comprehensive picture of what's happening K2. And I'll also stress that it is as comprehensive as an hour and 45 minutes can make it. And there's just a lot of really great work that has happened, and that we're excited to pull through. And so with that, I'll introduce Director Pease.
Thanks for having me here today. It's exciting to be able to talk about one of the things that I'm most passionate about professionally, which is every student learning to read. As we're going to start our time together today watching a video, this video highlights the work we need to do system-wide to accelerate the learning of those students furthest from educational justice who are not yet on track to be reading at grade level.
We take reading for granted. We often forget that literacy is the foundation of all learning and a pathway to liberation for every human being. For children, learning to read has meaning far beyond building skills. Reading is an act of identity building and affirmation, intellectualism, a way to understand and question the world around them, and most important, joy. This should be the reality for all children, but it's not the experience for our Black and Latinx children. Inequities in education stemming from white supremacist culture, unjust funding, and inadequate teacher prep have long isolated children of color from the instruction they deserve. Standard teaching practice predominantly centers on the identities and experiences of white children, minimally touching the lives, culture, and genius of other ethnicities and people. A child's education must center on their culture. CLI empowers teachers to craft instruction that promotes, elevates, and centers the cultures of Black and Latinx children to advance literacy mastery, offering windows and mirrors into children's identities. The ultimate strength of our democracy and nation rests on our ability as educators to help children develop literacy's true purpose and value. This is how we realize a world of equitable education for children to become powerful thinkers and world changers. Reading is foundational to liberation.
And so, as you know, when we look at our data, and we'll get into it a little bit later in R2 during the board session, as well as in this presentation, our students that are furthest from justice or further from being on track are those students who are Black, Latinx, and it's our moral imperative to really focus in and hone in on the students who are furthest from justice in Lake Washington. So today we have identified both content and language objectives, and every chance I have to give a little lesson on what they are, I do. So our content objectives are the overall learning that we're hoping to accomplish today, and the language objectives are how we're going to go about doing that learning. So as we think about this quote, acquiring literacy is an empowering process enabling millions to enjoy access to knowledge and information which broadens horizons, increases opportunities, and creates alternatives for building a better life. All students must be afforded the right to read through highly skilled teachers of reading using evidence-based curricular resources. So as we think about some definitions that we're going to lean into today, I wanted to talk about foundational literacy and how we're defining that in Lake Washington, because you'll often see here structured literacy and foundational literacy used simultaneously. So as we define foundational literacy, there's a robust body of research that tells us that systematic, explicit foundational skills instruction is crucial for students as they're learning to read and write in English. Reading the words on the page is just not an end in and of itself, but the goal and a stepping stone to allow students to interact with and learn about the world. Structured foundational skills in English move young readers and writers along a continuum of skills in 4 key areas: print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics, word recognition, and fluency. So as we think about this today, I want you to think about when we talk about foundational lit as they are the building blocks of early reading. They're also the building blocks of early writing, and they're crucial for student success in literacy. So the other, we're good, thank you. The other definition that I want to lean into and then give you a little bit of update around standards in Washington State is really when we talk about standards, we're talking about what students need to know and be able to do. And in this instance, right now, OSPI is requiring districts to use the Common Core state standards. They're in a process of revamping the standards towards more integration. So we're supposed to see this iteration or this reconfiguring of the standards in fall of 2025. And we'll be able to really lean into that work that we're setting the stage for, which is students building background knowledge, which is enhancing their ability to both read and write. So our vision for literacy in Lake Washington School District is really the end game of cultivating a love for reading and writing in every student and empowering them with the skills and confidence to become lifelong learners and effective communicators. As we think about the vision, we want learning centered on students in classrooms based on data. What is the data about our students tell us? What does the data from a FastBridge screener or a screener tell us? What does the teacher know about the student's culture, and how do they foster a sense of belonging for each student in their classroom? As we think of having high levels of rigor for every student in Lake Washington School District, it's really leaning into them having higher level thinking skills and taking them where they are today and accelerate their learning on toward grade level or above grade level standards. When we talk about the foundational literacy, we know that that is, as we said, is a building blocks to reading in Lake Washington and beyond. We look at a comprehensive literacy approach, which is really integrating reading, writing, speaking, and listening into content areas such as science and social studies. We know when I presented about literacy a while back, we talked about how that building background knowledge, kids will comprehend the information better and learn how to comprehend when they're learning around with areas of high interest. We also we want to partner with caregivers and support them with helping to support their students' reading at home, and with the skills and strategies we know that can be embedded in the everyday life of understanding how to read and what sounds words make and such. Then as far as classroom instruction, building-based work around literacy and district-based, we really want to promote a culture of reflection and continuous improvement, because over time we know we learn things and then we need to do better in response to what we've learned. So as we look at why third grade and why is it important that students learn to read, I mean, Dr. Holman said it fosters students leading a purposeful life. And so if we think about third grade being, we're shoring up that ability for students to learn to read so that they can access complex texts to learn about things that they are interested in. I also don't want to lose the fact that we're also giving students access to complex texts in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and third grade through our science and social studies content, where they're able to, they might not be able to read the text, but they in fact can listen to, have it read to them, etc. So there's no withholding any level of appropriate level text from any of the students in Lake Washington. As we think about the proficiencies that we want for students, we know that it's linked to increased grad rates, and with a sense of belonging and confidence, students are able to think more critically, and which is vital for lifelong success. So becoming a skilled reader, as you know, offers lifelong benefits. These skills not only drive academic success across all subject areas, but also enhance communication abilities, foster social and emotional growth, and set students up for success in life. So as we think about the likelihood of a student who's reading at grade level, there's a high likelihood that they will graduate on time and pursue higher ed. For students who aren't reading at grade level by third grade, it's going to take more support and skill of our teachers to accelerate their learning to be on grade level. But it can be done in third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade. But we'd like to get it done before they enter fourth grade. So we know, I remember back when I was a building principal and we gave the WASL assessment, that as a building principal I would say to the staff, this is not a fourth grade assessment. This is an assessment of what happens in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and third grade, and fourth grade. So I want all teachers to have the support so that they can have all students learning to read, because we know even one teacher that doesn't have the support and the skills to do that has unintended consequences, which leads to students not achieving reading at grade level by third grade. So I think it's important to highlight that if I were in a group with teachers, I'd have someone volunteer to read this out loud, but in this instance, I will do so. The foundational skills are not in an end of themselves. Rather, they are necessary, important components of effective reading instruction designed to develop proficient readers with the capacity to comprehend text across a range of disciplines. So once again, it's not the end, it's the beginning for our students. So as we talk about, and I'm going to revisit and go into more detail on this, this particular infographic, but what I want to share with you are the key components of what we expect in an elementary literacy classroom and what the components of that instruction are. Later, we'll talk about what specifically happens in each areas of the instruction. So currently, we have 90-minute literacy blocks in each of our buildings. And the consistent practice in our buildings for whole group instruction as one component is the use of Heggerty and practicing phonemic awareness. We also know that comprehension and vocabulary are also taught whole group, and that can be done through the content areas. In a literacy-forward classroom, there's evidence of student discourse and peer learning. So we need to move away from it's quiet when you're learning to read, that there's a din in the classrooms of students actively engaged with each other and then with the teacher as well. We know in the block 30, the whole group instruction is 20 to 30 minutes, and then the rest of the time is spent in small group instruction and in centers. So our center activities really are focusing on shoring up what students are learning at the table with the teacher, or they are giving students an opportunity to practice reading fluency with each other. It's really differentiated and gives them opportunities to collaborate with their peers. So as we think about building a system of clarity and interconnectedness, it takes clarity from the system to describe what it is that's expected and what it looks like, and the support to help principals and teachers implement that within their schools and classrooms. So if we think about that a system is never a sum of its parts, it's how it works together. It's a product of their interaction. So if one piece of these cogs are disrupted, it affects students' acceleration in reading and other content areas. So as we think about the components for strong literacy-based classroom instruction, we know that we use screening data to indicate what students need and then determine what additional assessments might they need to give the student to find out exactly what they need. So I know part of my own reading instruction was the teacher taught to the whole class often, and we all did the same thing, and when we were in small groups, we did the same thing as well. And our vision is, and hope for is, and is happening in many of our schools, is that what happens in small group instruction is data informed based on screener and multiple measures. Teachers need to know their students well and foster a two-way sense of belonging with teacher and student. So student knows things about the teacher that makes them connected, and the teacher knows things about the students that they can bring into the classroom and celebrate students' culture, which should influence how lessons are planned on a daily basis. Because I know if I'm a student sitting in a class and the teacher is speaking to me, something they know about me or know about my culture, the more at peace and how I feel belonging is enhanced greatly. So when we talk about high levels of rigor, we really want to lean into maintaining high academic standards for students while also ensuring that instruction is responsive to what students need. And I think the other thing to think about is that the content that they're being taught needs to be accessible. And sometimes that might look different depending on the student or what their specific needs are. We know that some students learn best in a peer-to-peer situation where they are practicing the skills that they've learned at the table, or that their teacher knows them so well that they've picked out books to practice fluency that are about their favorite topics, because we know kids will lean into and grow by working with things that they're comfortable and knowledgeable about.
Can I add a comment about that, Kelly?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So one of the places that this really resonates for me is thinking about student growth goals. Like, I think the language in student growth goals is cognitive and emotional engagement. So when we're thinking about levels of rigor for students, it is that, like, thinking about the cognition can be really high level. Like, the skills might need work, but the cognition that we're asking students to do that emotional and cognitive engagement is something that's really important to keep that level really high. And I think that's been a historic, not necessarily like Washington, but I think a historic problem with when we think about scaffolding for students is we don't ask a lot of the cognitive and emotional engagement, and that makes it harder for kids to be interested enough to really want to learn. Like, I will confess that I've told my kid, and I've said this to students, like, the hardest thing for students, for anyone, is to do something that seems boring. And so as we're thinking about instruction, we're really thinking about, like, how is it deeply engaging and how is it skill building? So that's what I wanted just to lean into when you're talking about high expectations, like the high expectations for cognitive and emotional engagement and achievement and learning acceleration are really important.
Great, thanks, Jen. And so as we think about, as to build on what Jen just said, really giving kids access to engaging and relevant content so that the learners build from what they know and focus on building background knowledge along with their comprehension. As I've shared before, that the relationship with caretakers really needs to be a two-way communication. What resources and support can we provide to support reading at home, but what do parents know about their students and their reading that they can bring to school to share with us? Because together we can support children at learning at high levels. So in buildings, and these highlights highlight of factors to enable strong literacy instruction in buildings really is with students at the center and aligns with professional learning community work around what do you notice from your data, how do you know what to teach, what do students know and can do, how do you teach them, and then how do you reflect again on what it is that you've taught and monitor and adjust your instruction accordingly. I think that really empowering our building leaders to feel confident around and to reinforce the knowledge of effective literacy practices and support them in their schools will be paramount as we continue our journey on all students reading at grade level. And then as we know our systems need to be clear and concise about what's expected and giving visuals for what our systems look like. So I think as we think about our ideal of, as a system, being in compliance with state and state regulations around dyslexia training and reading at grade level requirements, that helps us build our system to focus on the right thing. As far as I'm concerned, we should be exceeding and doing more than OSPI expects, but as a foundation, that was a good starting point for us. We think about how we have a universal screener in place, that 3 times a year we administer the FastBridge assessment, and in an amazing system for literacy, what we have are teachers looking at data after each benchmark and saying, what is it that my students know and can do, and then where do I need to gain more information? And so that they can then gather data to do so. As a system, we look at R2 to say, okay, what does the data in R2 tell us about our system and how we're progressing? And we also use overall data on FastBridge on a regular basis to say, okay, where are pockets of excellence and where are pockets of opportunity? So we're committed as a system and a leadership team to really support building administrators with the knowledge and skills they need, and then supporting them with what do you do when how do you celebrate it when you see it happening, and then how do you support when you see something that could be improved upon. So this is a very simplistic view, but really all we do centers on what students need. And so if CLT, principals, teachers, and MTSS coaches focus on what students need to be readers, it will enhance the reading experience for kids and accelerate their learning. So I wanted to, go ahead, Jen.
I was just going to see if we want to pause for any questions or comments. We're about to jump into looking at the data from R2. That will just give a moment for processing.
Okay, sorry, bear with me here. Thank you. And I was going to ask, you talk about the foundational elements as being crucial for student success and literacy. So what happens to students who have not mastered those foundational elements by 3rd, 4th, 5th grade?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Lindsay. What we know that within Wonders, although sometimes I think teachers assume kids know how to read when they get into 4th and 5th grade, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And so really we've heard an outcry from teachers who are now saying, hey, my kids don't have the foundational skills that they've had previously. And so we really have been doing a lot of research around effective resources for teachers to enhance that foundational literacy support in intermediate. So we've landed on, we're calling them word work bundles, and those are purchased and we're ready to get them out into the hands of our upper elementary teachers, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade teachers, along with professional learning around how do you teach morphology and some of the key concepts that are important for our intermediate learners.
Do you mind if I have a follow-up really quickly? So is there ever a point when foundational skills are either just abandoned or receive less emphasis in order for a student to access grade level content?
I think that we're always going to lean into foundational skills to have students be able to access grade level content. And I think sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to happen through being able to read the text. So we'll just continue, like, we're going to get you the skills to access this, but we can read. We can have it read to them. We can have it on tape. We can have video. There are so many ways to bring information to students that isn't contingent on being able to sound out words and text. But we want we want them to be able to do that.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciated what you talked about with kindergarten, how you're still able to access challenging content. I kind of view it like that. Yeah. So thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay.
I'm curious if there's any, you've talked quite a bit about FastBridge, and I know there's a lot that teachers are looking at, or that we're looking at for our students. Are there any particular areas, sort of at a high level, where because foundational skills are certainly in there, but there's even more than that. Are there any particular areas that are of concern, or does it sort of depend? Like, I can imagine even building to building, this building might have a group of students that's struggling more with X, and this building Y. But are there any particular areas where we're looking at from a district level where we really need to lead in, or is the answer just foundational skills, which is fine too, because obviously that's important?
And I think it's foundational skills, and it's also thinking about equipping teachers with the knowledge of building those connections with students. I think that's imperative, because the will to read is real, and students need to have that, and they do that through that sense of belonging and relationships and cultural understanding that should be happening between teacher and student. So, you have something, Jen?
No, I was just getting ready to say, I think part of what your question, I think, is probably what we'll look at in R2 that we could jump in, because there are definitely groups of students that we're looking at that we need to continue to really think about how we're serving them.
All right.
Before we jump into R2, I have one more question.
Okay.
So you talked about how it's a collective effort, right? The teachers, the MTSS coaches, families, parents, to get students where they need to be. And I was curious, with FastBridge in particular, is there an expectation, or is there a conversation that we're having with families explaining what the FastBridge assessment is showing, outside of maybe just like individual inquiries? Like, is there a standard?
We recommend or have teachers send home the family reports to schools. I think that's an area in which we could do better, and that's on my list now to really think about. It's not that we're not communicating with parents. I mean, a big focus of the middle of the year conference a lot of the time is on that, how is your student doing in reading? We also do communication through students who qualify for students who qualify for safety net services. We do quite a robust communication with them around, this is what we see with your student. Here's the FastBridge data. Here's where they're qualifying, and here are the skills we're working on. As far as, a general district level, this is how to interpret your FastBridge scores. We don't put it out from the district level because it is very individual to student, teacher, and the strategies they're using in their classrooms.
And it's also, FastBridge is 20 minutes 3 times a year. So it's something that we can't, we use it to guide instruction, but it's not like a prescriptive, this is all of the in-depth testing of your student. And we talked a lot when we first implemented FastBridge of how to give it the right weight, because to have someone go, this is my FastBridge score, oh no, or oh joy. I mean, it's a dipstick, and it's meant to point us a direction to get more data and to think about how we're guiding instruction with that. For the safety net teachers who are working specifically with students, they use FastBridge more in depth, and so there's more communication, there's more thought there. But for most of our families, it's such a quick assessment that we value it, we want to use it, and there's not like a manual that goes with, here's what you do about the score. Here's what it means. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I also think that we have, in our vision for a system-wide focus on data is really having grade level teams work together with the safety net, multilingual, and special education teachers to unpack their data and then say, what other multiple measures do we need to know so we can hone in on the specific skills students need. So.
And that's to your question earlier, Lindsay, that's, I think, part of when a student's not being successful, like some of what we do, I think there's been a pretty significant shift in how safety net has worked over the past several years. And I think that's definitely seeing an impact. But that's really having instruction be pushed into the classroom and focused on supporting the individual students in the classroom.
Okay. So let's take a look at some system-wide reading data. We've talked about this a little already, but we have a comprehensive assessment protocol where we go from reporting out at the macro level using Smarter Balanced and some BOI to NOI, beginning of year to end of year data. And then really in the classroom where teachers are honing in on both summative and formative assessments that they're doing on a daily basis. As part of the structured or foundational literacy training we do, there's a book it's called Assessing Multiple Measures, where if a student has a data profile on the screener, we then say, okay, you need to give these assessments to unpack that, to really get to what do students know and need to be able to do. And then reporting out and communicating information to families on the report card is also something. As I was looking through our R2 data, there were some highlights, and I want to talk to you a little bit about those, and then show you give you some background on multilingual students, and then talk to you about maybe some areas of opportunity. So we have when we think about 80%, and you think about if you look at the traditional MTSS pyramid, whether it's 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional, really that 80% is baseline of where we should be. I believe that we can get beyond that, and really to get beyond that, we really need to address what individual students in individual classrooms need to have their learning accelerated. So also thinking about, we'll talk a little bit about how students who are continuously enrolled are doing over time, and then some celebrations around our multilingual learners. So as we think about our currently enrolled multilingual learners, to qualify for multilingual supports, you take the WIDA assessment, or the WIDA screener, and I think you had a board brief about this not too long ago, maybe last week, where it assesses reading, writing, listening, and speaking. We know that students acquire listening and reading at a faster rate because they are receptive skills, they're calling interpretive skills, than writing and speaking, because those are expressive. So as we think about, we were talking this morning, could we have would it make sense to have 80% of our students currently enrolled in ML services be reading at grade level? We could see that, because if the listening and reading, if the reading scores accelerate at a higher level, then the writing and speaking, it might be the reading is at grade level because we have students who are enrolled in ML who pass the SBA, who also are continuing to receive services. So I want us to make sure we think about students enrolled in multilingual. It is really an aggregate of the 4 strategies of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Click again. So this is a celebration as we think about how our multilingual students are doing, or who are currently eligible for services. If you look at this chart, this data chart, and this is true throughout, I'll show you the 3 different data points that we've looked at. This is true throughout all of the R2 data, that our currently enrolled students are accelerating. And we know that there isn't just one thing that causes that acceleration, but there's some causal pieces that, given that our demographic of students hasn't changed dramatically in the past 5 to 10 years, about who makes up our ML group, we think about that 2 years ago, we really honed in with our multilingual teachers and our safety net teachers on helping them to understand how to teach structured literacy, foundational literacy, which isn't the end-all be-all, because multilingual is teaching reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So it's part of kind of the story, but not the only story. And so as we lean into that, we know the correlation with the work around foundational lit, as well as the work that we've been doing with the screening and referral process for multilingual students, where we have basically, if schools are wanting to have multilingual students receive safety net services, they need to meet with us, and we as a team, and for every student, and really lean into multilingualism isn't a deficit. The students are learning English, and so putting them in a group that is supposed to accelerate reading outside of core instruction isn't appropriate. So we also believe that we have more students receiving consistent Tier 1 instruction in the classroom and not being served in intervention programs, nor being qualified for special education services. And then this data set is just showing you again how we are, the students meeting on FAST at the end of the year benchmark on our universal screening tool has increased. Relative, it's not where we want it to be, but it's on, we know it's on an upward trend. Okay, go ahead. Okay, and once again, as we look at our data here, we know, I had a conversation with Tim Krieger today around, we've stayed consistent at 2 for the past, and benchmarking at 2 for the past few years, and thinking about how, if we continue to accelerate that, our multilingual and program growth, that can influence perhaps where our benchmarking is. We know that we're benchmarked against school districts that don't always have the robust ML population that we do, and so that's just considerations to take into account as we're looking at our data.
One note, and we'll mention this later tonight, but I think every time that we are 2 in benchmarking, Mercer Island is 1. So it's a very different school district.
Smaller. Okay. Click again. Okay. So some celebrations with our data. And again, I'll put a caveat there that it's not where we want it to be, but we're seeing movement in a positive trend around our, the slide is off, around our Hispanic Latino races. The slide got the border. We should be looking at our Hispanic Latino growth and also because I'll talk about Black African American as an area that we need to focus on. And then when we think about our low-income students who've been continuously enrolled, the other thing with continuously enrolled that's really important to know is that the continuously enrolled kids are about half of what our total enrollment is. So we have 2,000 plus students enrolled in third grade, but only 1,140 of them have been with us since kindergarten.
And this is a unique cohort with that, because it was either they were with us, or they either weren't enrolled with us, or they received a slash mark on the report card, which means that for whatever reason we didn't have enough, and actually it wasn't a slash mark, it was an IE, insufficient evidence during COVID. So for whatever reason, we did not feel like we could give the other 1,000 students in this grade level a score. So they either weren't with us or we didn't have enough evidence. So one of the things that we keep thinking about with this group of students is this is the group that entered kindergarten in remote learning. And so as much as it's 2025, when we're thinking about our students, we think we're still seeing impact of remote learning and COVID. And I think we see it in a couple different places. So I wanted to echo Kelly's call-outs of the celebrations that we have, especially in thinking about the cohorts, and have a real recognition that there are significant places that we need to consider, we need to continue thinking.
Sorry, can you explain a little bit what reading at grade level per report card means? The other indicators are pretty clear to us, but that one's a little unique, and sort of unpacking what goes into that. And it's just a yes or no from what I've seen.
Yes.
What causes a student to be a yes or a student to be a no?
Yeah, and we give teacher guidance to look at multiple measures. Look at what they see in the classroom, what the results of SBA and FastBridge and other measures that they may use on a daily basis with students to make a determination on whether a student is reading at grade level.
One note I'll make, because I think this comes up in multiple places in R2, and we can reference it later in the night, but one place that we consistently, our student group went consistently down was our students with IEPs. And it went down in a number of different areas, but specific to the report card. One of the things that we want to call out with that is over the past several years, we've really worked with our teachers and with our building leaders, especially at the elementary level, to make sure all students are scored against standards. And that's something that goes to thinking about high expectations, is making sure that all students are being assessed towards grade level standards, and that we're reporting that in a way that has integrity. So much of R2 is hard to say what's causal, so we're looking at what are the different factors and hypotheses that could go into that. But that is one significant shift that we've made, that your question about report cards brought up.
And for the elementary report card, and tell me if I'm inaccurately reporting this, for every cell on the report card, there's guidance for teachers as to how we arrive at a grade to be able to put in that particular cell. That has been that's been in place for 10 years, and has been updated over time in an attempt to have as standard an application of grading for elementary students, and so this is another aspect of that.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments on the data?
Well, we have round 2 later tonight, so.
Yeah, save some for later.
I know, but we have the super expert right now, so.
Oh, right. Okay. No pressure. Oh, all right. No, I don't want to ever be called a super expert on something. Actually, I don't mind around this. So, right. All right. So as we reflect in forward plan, we really know that curriculum implementation is at the forefront with new literacy tools coming on board in 26, 27. We're going to really have to lean into professional learning right? What is it that teachers need to know and be able to do, and scaffold and support them with how do you teach all students to read as well as comprehend and understand complex vocabulary. We have our MTSS systems and use of data that without data, we don't know what, my opinion, we don't know what to do. So we need to be using data on a regular basis to say, what is it as a system level, saying what's going well, oh, I wonder why this data is like this, and investigate what's going on and seeing highlights and opportunities. We know at the heart is that teacher professional learning and the support that they feel with the confidence in the sport, just like we want our kids to be connected, valued, and belong. We want that for our teachers, where they can then feel confident in teaching all students in their classrooms. And really focusing in on what is our leadership, that leadership with focus on equity, so that we're really honing in on the students who are furthest from educational justice. So at the district level, we know that in partnership with level directors, we are really shoring up professional learning. And I think that professional learning and job embedded supports. So we know that R2 is our data collection and helps us set some forward goals. We currently lean into the legislative requirements to really put literacy and accountability in the forefront of how are our students doing toward reading at grade level. Really, the curriculum and instruction resource selection will be pivotal in what we do next, because there's a body of research over the past few years, and you've heard me talk about this, around integration of content. And so how do we move a system that has been they've been expected to use the curriculum with fidelity, which means you're on this page on this day, and we really are thinking of shifting our thoughts to integrity of implementation around know your students well and use know the resources and the best practices enough to know what you should deliver to them. Our hope for and goals for next year are that every SIP contains a K-3 reading at grade level goal, really honing in on our students furthest from justice. And there, I think this year, the level directors have been working with principals on PLC learning walks and focusing on students that they've really honed in on, looking at Dale, but they're really focused on to have conversations about, and what practices are in place and where are some opportunities to set.
Thanks, Kelly. I would just elaborate just a little further. One of the things that they're doing, we started this practice a year or two ago and really refining it this year, is we've asked our buildings, who are you most concerned about and why? And that's a broad question, right? And so part of it is the why. Well, I'm concerned about this set of students. Well, why? So they get into digging into some data, both summative as well as some of the street data, and just knowing kids. It had to be with an instructional focus. And so we're talking a small group of kids, which is fascinating in that the work that they're doing might be with 6 kids in their school. It might be ML, 3rd grade math. Okay, well, what about that what is the learning problem we're trying to solve? What is the teaching problem we're trying to solve? What is the work the principal's doing to impact the teacher, to impact the kids? What's the work level directors are doing to impact, and what's the work we're doing? Just that through line of work. And what's fascinating is when you walk into a classroom and you look at the learning experience through the eyes of maybe 2 kids in the entire classroom, it seems like common sense, but that's not typically been a practice in schools. We look at learning broadly, like, is the classroom engaged? They were really engaged. How do you know? Well, everyone was raising their hands. Everyone was raising their hands? Because I saw 2 kids who didn't raise their hands one time or turn and talk at all. So then you start digging into that, and these are the kids who typically are furthest from educational justice. And so they're working in smaller groups, but then what happens is when they go to different classrooms, and for level directors, even different schools, it's opening up their line of sight in terms of how instruction is really impacting kids and the kids who really need to accelerate or certainly reach grade level standards in lots of ways. So it's really powerful work that we're embarking on and involving CLT central leaders in those classroom visits as well. So that's just a little bit deep in that. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Dale. And so as we think about getting down to the classroom level, we want teachers to have deep knowledge of students and the standards. And so through building relationships and leveraging student assets, where we have a seamless literacy block where all students are actively engaged, either with the teacher or with other students, or practicing skills, sometimes independently. We want to continue to look at our data, our classroom level data, and celebrate strengths and lean into opportunities. And really our MTSS coaches provide us with an opportunity to have the MTSS coaches sit with grade level teams in conjunction with multilingual safety net and special education teachers to really look at what is this comprehensive approach to getting all kids reading at grade level based on data. We'll also look at what are some key strategies, because we go back and forth around, is it best to shore up what's happening in the small group and get that so that that accelerates all kids, and then move toward what's happening at in the centers or in the other activities. And right now we've leaned into what's happening with the teacher, because every child is receiving some type of close to individualized instruction on just what they need. Next year is our focus on, go ahead, is our focus on really what happens outside of the table in the rest of the classroom while the teacher is teaching small group. Because right now I think what we see in our system is not really the ideal of what we're looking for. And so as we think about some of the tools that we use in an effective classroom, in a literacy classroom, I want to talk a little bit about some tools that are being overused and the impact that that potentially has on our students, and also talk about how we have specific tools and strategies to get at each section of small group, whole group, and kids at tables. So with small group instruction, we really know that that focuses on phonics and fluency, and we do that through, in our K2 and soon to be third grade classrooms as needed, the use of a structured literacy program, which we are piloting at several schools this year. I know you've probably heard of it. It's called UFly. It's a University of Florida resource where it really takes a sequential approach for the teacher to teach the skills students need, and has evidence-based scope and sequence that if the teachers don't have to, in Wonders it has it there, but teachers were having to go in and kind of try to find it and then put it together. And we've done our best until we came across UFly to do that for teachers. But UFly is seemingly something that promotes promising practice. We have schools where we know they've implemented it with fidelity, and that we've seen gains from BOI to MOI. And so that's very promising for us. The reason we start with pilots is so that we can, before we go system-wide, is so that we can figure out the best way of providing professional learning and implementation strategy. So I feel confident that next year we'll have, in collaboration with the coaches, UFly happening in every K2 classroom and third grade classrooms as needed. So as we think about whole group instruction, right, we've got Haggerty, where we work on phonemic awareness. And then I want us to think about the use of Wonders. In Wonders, there are good strategies and pedagogy to teach comprehension and fluency. And so we know that teachers find that it's hard to find all the time to do a 90-minute literacy block and then science and social studies. So there's a team of us working on how can we help embed the comprehension and vocabulary strategies into science and social studies so that there'll be a direct correlation to this is how you need to teach this as you teach the first inquiry in social studies. We have groups of teachers that will be coming together to help us build out those connections and that work. We know that, go ahead.
2 notes. One is that our social studies curriculum, our K5, is highly engaging. It's really topical. It's really interesting. It has a great rigorous background to it. And Mark has his hand up.
Oh, Mark.
Yes, I'm curious. I seem to recall having that elementary schools have very good success with the Reading with Rover programs at a couple of our schools. Are we still continuing that? And it seemed to me that, you know, being able to read out loud to each other kind of helps build the confidence in the reading skills. And the Reading with Rover kind of added to that. Are we still using it?
So I'm not aware of Reading with Rover programs in our schools. I know that it was alive and well at Rose Hill about a decade ago, but I will look around to other people who might have, yeah. But I agree that students engaging with reading to someone is really powerful.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So as we think about so I talked about the strive to integrate and build resources for teachers to teach comprehension vocabulary through content area. Then I want to talk about what happens in the small groups, because we know that there's fluency practice like the Reading with Rover program would do, and they can be reading to each other. I've seen students read to stuffed animals in classrooms, but really that practice of reading aloud. We know that word work is important, and manipulating letters to make words and practicing that with friends is really powerful. That enhancing vocabulary and really trying to take maybe what they've learned in the small group environment, applying that to learning new words is really beneficial for our students. We know that there's an overuse of Lexia right now throughout our system. And what the guidance is 45 minutes total a week, which is 15 minutes a session. And so we're working on, and that will be a hurdle that we will surmount next year. We have the clear expectations, but I think that teachers are doing small group, and they know that if students are on Lexia, they're not being harmed. And there's such a thing as too much Lexia, that if there's too much, sometimes we don't see the aggressive growth that we see because their brains don't have an opportunity to chill and assimilate their knowledge into their long-term memory. So that's definitely, as we focus on small group next year, we really will provide ample resources and menus of activities that teachers can use for small group instruction. So, as we know, we have ongoing professional learning. We onboard new teachers every year and then support teachers by going out into schools around implementation of our core curricular materials. Wonders is still our core, and that's our expectation. And we have worked, every time we do a foundational lit training, we highlight Wonders and a Wonders map on what are the highlights that you should be using in your classroom. So until we have a new curriculum in place, we're still going to continue to promote use of Wonders in the capacity, and then really as far as whole group instruction, and then some ideas for those small group sessions that are happening during that small group instruction time. So this year we're expanding UFly. We're expanded to UFly, and then next year we anticipate that UFly will be required K2 and for third grade teachers who have students, which they all do, who still need this type of support. And then the word work bundles to help address, Lindsay, that acceleration for our students who are in 3rd through 5th grade. And it really happens through professional learning, use of data, and targeted school support. We get out into schools weekly to help with, principals will call with a question, hey, this grade level team is struggling with this, how can you come out and help? We've implemented UFly, can you come take a look at it and tell us what's going well? The expectation also with UFly is that it's a collaborative implementation, so it's not just the teacher doing UFly with small groups, but it's teacher doing UFly with small groups, safety net, bridging, and doing the next component of UFly, and ML actually leaning into that too. And we're in the process of getting our special ed teachers trained in that tool. I think that also, I think you might see in our system UFly applied whole group, and that's it's not the most effective way to use UFly, because the benefit of that is knowing what students know and can do, and you have all of them in front of you, and you can gear into what each student needs as you're teaching the lesson. And if you're teaching it whole group, like we said previously, there are students who may not be, like Dale shared, who may be looking actively engaged but are not. So UFly should be small group in conjunction with specialists. And then as we move towards adoption, we will be able to provide ample professional learning for our teachers there. And so leading into that, we know that we need to continue to partner with our MTSS coaches and building principals around the training that or the professional learning that we have in the system. We know that all principals would benefit from a foundational literacy principal cohort to really think about how can I identify effective literacy practices and understand when I go into that classroom. So we have work to do as a system to continue to support our building administrators to gain the knowledge and skills to be able to feel confident to implement literacy instruction in classrooms. So we have in the process of establishing a task force to meet the goal of reading at grade level by 3rd grade. And so the idea is to have integrity of implementation of K-3 foundational literacy systems that results in all students reading at grade level by 3rd grade. And so to do that, it's going to take all of us working arm in arm across multiple departments, because we know that it's not just decoding text that accelerates students' learning. It's all the things. It's belonging, it's culture, it's being able to have interventions directly aligned to what's happening in the classroom. So we formed the committee this year and really are leaning into the story of literacy in Lake Washington and then generating interests and some actionable items. And then next year we plan to take the plan, the 3-year plan, and vet it with key stakeholders, and then begin to implement the high leverage building and classroom foundational skills and have strategies to do so. So as we end, I just wanted to recenter us on what our vision for literacy is in Lake Washington School District, and then give you an opportunity to ask questions or seek clarification.
Ella.
So at the start you said that like reading was important because then it obviously like fosters like sense of belonging and like confidence within students, but like are you guys monitoring that, and if so, like how?
Yeah, and we do have a perception survey that is given to all students, specifically in how students feel about themselves as readers. We don't get that level of detail, but we know in general if students report a sense of belonging that their ability to accelerate increases. Yeah, but nothing that detailed.
So one of the elements I want to highlight to that question, though, is thinking about as the reading advisory has been looking at instructional resources, a question that's been really, really important for them to consider as they're looking at resources is, do students see themselves reflected back in the readings? Are the practices, the cultures, like, are those things that a student could see themselves? Because that's something that we wonder about wonders, but as we move forward, that sense of belonging is so important in a classroom and to a student feeling like a reader and like they can be part of a productive classroom. So that's a great question.
It also goes to the idea for a student who, if a student is in a classroom and they know their teacher, believes in them, has high expectations for them, has demonstrated, has worked with them to accomplish something, to have success, like those are all indicators that someone's going to have a better self-perception and you're going to feel like you belong in that space. And so it isn't about directly related sense of belonging reading. Yes, there's a connection, but it really is Am I a successful student? Am I part of a community? Do I see myself as part of this classroom? And then that translates really across the board to levels of success. And we know that when students see themselves as learners, let's say they are behind, the opportunity to accelerate learning is much greater then. So if a student has the exact opposite opinion, we know what learning looks like in that situation too. So it's a great question.
One of the things that made me think about was a question that came up about one of the things that we lean into, like a lever in the system, is thinking about teacher professional learning and ways to know if that worked. Like, I think the question was, how do we know if professional learning is working? And I think data is one way to look at it. Like, are we making a difference in scores? And you can see in some places that efforts are making a difference. But there's a whole bunch of other ways, and I went back to this slide because the stakeholders in this group, it's not just all hands on deck, everyone's involved. It's really thinking about what are all the different ways that we would look for success. So yes, we would look at student reading scores. We would look at student sense of belonging. And then we would go up a level to identify what are the instructional practices that we see in the classroom. So that would be like the principal learning walks, is thinking about that actually is what we're doing, is we're looking for what are the practices we see, how do we coach each other as leaders. And in order for those practices to be there, what do teachers need to learn? So identifying where in the system are teachers going to learn about structured literacy or about implementing UFly or about increasing sense of belonging. And then what do principals need to learn in order to support teachers with that? So it's a whole strategy map that ends with the student at the center, but there's multiple ways that it backwards maps to how are we knowing if what we're doing has an impact. And R2 is kind of that broad umbrella of it, but there's all those different pieces that go into thinking about how are we creating a strategic level work with this, and how do we know how each part is working, and how do we progress monitor our own work.
Yeah, building on that, a quick story, then I'll get to a question. But I guess my fourth grader, who's my striving reader, at the start of the year, it's always hard, right? Because you get a new general education teacher every year, and she's sorting out, and so the feedback from her teacher was, she keeps saying this is hard, and yeah, it is hard for her, and her teacher was like, do it anyway, and we just had conferences 2 weeks ago, and her teacher's like, she doesn't say that anymore, and my daughter's feedback, which was super interesting, a few weeks ago, she was like, school's always really hard at the beginning of the year, and then by the end it's easy. And I think it's really that connection with her teachers, which takes time to establish, but her teachers, they do believe in her from the start, and they keep working on those connections. So that's success. That's an N of 1, but that is success. And that's what every student deserves, is a teacher who holds high expectations for them, a teacher who understands that relationship building and hangs in there until they see success. Question, thinking about the recently announced changes, and you may not have answers here, but for highly capable, that's one stakeholder I don't see on this slide. Thinking about as we are integrating students who have been served in highly capable in a pull-out model and integrating those into the classroom. Has there been any thought, and understanding that highly capable learners can still struggle with reading? Those things are not mutually exclusive at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thinking about what maybe what rigor looks like for those students in all of the components that you've been talking about.
Yeah, highly capable should be one of the stakeholders there. I think we just hadn't added it to the slide. The learning that coaches are doing right now, that they actually started last year with depth and complexity, and then they're engaging in 40 hours of professional learning with Dr. Stambaugh from Whitworth. And so part of that focus is to think about the highly capable students that are going to be in the classroom full-time, so that they're only going to not have that 30-minute once, maybe twice a week. Their literacy and math instruction has always been in the classroom. And so the goal with the work now is actually to provide teachers with more resources and more support in the form of extensions for illustrative mathematics, in the form of strategies, in the form of problem-based work, all those kinds of things, so that the teachers can provide our students with the rigor that they need. And I think it's going to be all students should have access to that level of rigor. And that goes back to the earlier statement, in my head, it goes back to my earlier statement of saying kids can think at really high levels, even if their skill level isn't there, that if we are cognitively engaging them. I mean, some of the work, there were 3 schools last year that engaged in the residency with Dr. Adeyemi Stembridge, and that really is about having high expectations for all students in a way that is transformative. And he was one of the main contributors to the new student growth goals, that same work for rigor. This year we have, I believe, 3 or 4 elementary schools are engaging in a residency, shared residency that's here. It'll be in the boardroom. And I think we have some other schools that are working on doing residencies as well. But that's not the only piece of it, that we're really thinking that students learn when they're deeply engaged, and we should have high levels of rigor for everyone. But specific to our students who qualify for highly capable services, this reading task force will serve them as well.
Kelly, could you talk about the word work bundles? And I'll just give you my quick anecdote. 150 years ago when I was a teacher, teaching 4th grade, and a couple of my qualified, highly capable students, I stumbled upon the fact that they couldn't sound out multisyllabic words. And so we used the resources that were available at the time, I believe rewards. And so the idea that, our highly capable learners, what's so interesting is a lot of times they accelerate so fast, like there's times they don't get instruction in some of these areas, and then it's this gap, but their thinking is so advanced that you have to be very intentional to really make sure that this, and so will you talk about the word work bundles and what those supports are for our 3rd through 5th grades?
Sure. So in looking at, we thought about applying what we do with phonics and phonemic awareness at the K2 level, and realized that would be very off-putting for our intermediate grades. So we procured resources that really do break down that word work, like really sounds, letters make sounds and sounds make words, and in a way that is more attainable to them. It doesn't seem little kid. So it's really taking those same skills and making them more intermediate appropriate. And also thinking about really the crux of, and what you just said, is being able to sound out multisyllabic words, right? And thinking about how do they understand root words and morphology, and how parts of words work together to help you define what a complex vocabulary word is. Because we know that, my son was one of these who would just read through and put whatever word he thought made sense, because he was missing that, the ability to sound out. And there are reasons for that. And I've told you stories about trying to get him to do Haggerty in the car when he was in 10th grade and such, but yeah. But yeah, well, his response was a YouTube channel. So I think that it's really transferring those skills to more intermediate appropriate visual and optics that teachers can use to teach those very foundational skills, with assessments built in to say, what is the student missing? Because really we can say, oh, we need to do morphology and do it with all the students. And maybe some kids don't need that, or some kids know all the letters and the sounds and just need to understand how they work together. So we want to ensure kids have dignity and respect, and give them resources that are aligned to their age level.
And what you identified is an issue with any kind of a pull-out program. If you're pulled out of core instruction, you're missing core instruction.
Can you define what morphology is?
It's really how words work together to sound out, so that you can sound out words. So it's those granular components of different parts of speech.
Any other questions?
Since we have a couple minutes, is it okay if I ask a question?
Yes. I did have a question. question. I was
Oh,
trying
you
to
did?
make everybody a
Oh.
chance. I doubt it. Mine was more of a general R2 question, but it goes to our multilingual learners and the success we're seeing with students that were once eligible for multilingual services. You notice a trend. It's not quite as large of a success rate in math and in science, but you still see a different trend for our multilingual. Their students who are once eligible for multilingual services are achieving at a higher level than maybe even the entire general population. And in the summary write-ups, it mentioned kind of the different efforts that go in with the students to help them succeed in, say, math and science. And part of it is, specific vocabulary, explaining the math terminology, making sure that there's an understanding of what the question is being asked and what the words mean. And I was curious, is that I'm making a leap, but I'm wondering if the reason why we're not seeing kind of progress at the same rate for our general education population is that we don't use the same strategies to ensure that there's a common level of understanding of like language concepts within math and science that we ensure that we do with our multilingual learners, and therefore we see a higher rate of success potentially. Is that something that's been discussed?
So we've worked as a system around sheltered instruction observation protocol strategies, which are really how general ed teachers can make content accessible. We were in the final implementation stage and moving to maintenance when we shut down in COVID. And so we've done a lot of asynchronous learning around that, but have offered, so I think, yes, there are strategies that multilingual teachers are using. I also think that multilingualism is an asset, and students may be coming to us already understanding math and science concepts in their home language, and they have had successful experiences with that, in which they're transferring to English. So I think it's not one thing that, but my multilingual, Julian Cortez, the multilingual director, is really working on a strategy to really get at what happens in core instruction to support all learners, particularly our multilinguals, because we know if we meet the needs of our multilinguals, it's going to raise achievement for everyone.
I think that's it's a really interesting question when you think about how we access our teachers and what we can expect of them or how they work together. I think to Kelly's point, we may have been at almost implementation phase before COVID, but we've had 50% turnover of our staff since then. So in a large system, when we think about 700 elementary teachers and think about maintaining professional learning and all the different things that go into that, there's continual thinking about how we reset the system and how we have consistency in instruction. So I think like in math, I think we see consistent growth in there, but I don't know that we've used the same strategies around SIOP or vocabulary. What I do know we've had, and what you've seen in classrooms, is a focus on student discourse. So I think there's different places that we have, again, like some bright spots, and I'll call them task lights in about 45 minutes. But thinking about where we are in this giant system that we have, that we can do the tweaks and the pushes to get everything working in the same direction. So the reading task force is an example of that. I think ML teachers co-teaching in classrooms is another way that we're seeing practice kind of, I'm trying to think of the positive word for spread, that there's people are really learning from each other. And I think I shared, and it's more appropriate to math, but when I was at Inglewood a couple of weeks ago, I was talking with one of the math teachers who was talking about how this other math teacher, Jennifer Hahn, had this brilliant idea for how kids should work together with shared assignments and how to increase engagement with that. So the entire math department said, okay, we're just going to do that. It's a great idea. We're all going to do that. And there were multiple times that I was in their algebra classrooms that the teachers were talking about how their shared practice, like an individual's practice, became the department practice. And so I think the more, like, that's an intentional thought on our part, and it's part of thinking about at elementary, the MTSS coaches, and with co-teaching across all levels, I'm not going to phrase this as rhetorical. It's powerful to raise up effective practice and to have people learn from each other and see the difference it makes. And so that's something we've been really thinking about. What are ways that we are engaging? Again, working on not rhetorical questions, because these are things we're doing and planning for. We want to take practices like SIOP and make it be something that people feel really empowered and excited to do. And we're also shifting part of our frame and thinking about change from, we do an enormous amount of professional learning and moving to expectation of practices. So thinking about like UFly at K3 next year, or thinking about the classrooms that I was in at Juanita Elementary, where the 5th grade teachers had gone to see practice that was happening at Finn Hill, thought it was so exciting that they immediately went back and they saw it the last week before break. They went back after break and implemented the vertical learning surfaces in their classroom, to huge transformation. So we're thinking about how do we move from thinking about things and talking about them to we really are making strong moves in instruction and having that be what is consistent. So I think there's points, like places where we can say we've seen some change and we can draw some causal lines. And as a system, we are working on being more and more consistent with what we expect and what we support.
I think this is the second year of the transformation of Safety Net from a predominantly pull-out model to more of a push-in model. I'm not seeing massive, like, if anything, the results that we're looking at in R2 are neutral to positive in just about every group. Do you have any additional data or insight into sort of how that is going? Because I know at the time there were a lot of concerns of, how are we going to ensure that all of our students are still reading by 3rd grade, and focusing on those students who weren't quite where they needed to be in the early grades. How would you say that transformation to more push-in instruction is going, or is there any sort of color commentary that you can add here beyond it's not an absolute failure, which is also great?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. Honestly, what you're seeing out there, it's a mixed bag. We have some schools that are embracing in multilingual and in Safety Net that push-in model. And I think what we're reflecting on, because it hasn't been just over the past couple of years that we've expected that, it's been a long time. And so ways that we're addressing that really will be more intentionality around supporting building administrators with building schedules that are conducive to that collaborative push-in model. And really thinking about, there's a school that I have in mind that I would like you to go see at some point that is very artfully using UFly with the Safety Net teacher adjacent to that instruction, and we're seeing great moves for kids. And it's also getting all of the systems in place, getting the classroom teacher to the point where I am teaching all kids core instruction, to the Safety Net teacher saying, I am confident and feel competent to push in and support during core instruction. And really then working with our building administrators to build the foundations, the structure in which to do that. So we are a work in progress for sure, and we'll get there.
Thank you for walking through sort of what classroom instruction looks like and small groups and the different activity stations and so on. How does special education fit into here for students that are qualified for reading services? I have no idea even if that's 100% of our students on IEPs, 1% or somewhere in between. I guess it's in one of those places, but yeah. Can you speak a little bit more to what that looks like and how that fits into what you've been talking about so far?
And I will respond with, we're working very closely with special education, the special education team this year, to build in to expand our flowcharts that we use around Safety Net, where it directly connects data and multiple measures to curricular tools. And so being really succinct and being able to have the time and professional learning opportunities to ensure that all special education teachers have the training or professional learning necessary to implement a structured literacy or foundational literacy program. I think that, Shannon was saying that in Lake Washington, in Lake Washington, there are fewer students who qualify for specific learning disability, and it's an interesting, and more students are qualifying under the autism qualification. And so as we think about that, we kind of have to ferret out whether we know that most students need direct instruction in foundational literacy. And so because a student's main qualification is autism doesn't mean that they don't need the same scaffolds and supports that a student with a specific learning disability has. But it's really about that partnership and guaranteed and implementation of evidence-based curriculum resources and practices. And the fact that we have, what was that? Shannon shared the stat with you around the turnover, like how many new
Yes, that's special education teachers are some of our highest turnover for the past several years, and so that's something we've really been thinking about. How do we retain teachers and get them up to speed on all of the things that they need to learn to serve our students?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One thing I want to say, and I want to recognize Kelly's leadership in this, is that we're in the midst of systemic change with K3, K5 literacy, and there's so many pieces that have been working along, and with the work of the reading advisory and thinking about moving from all of these different pieces that have been working well to working well together, I think is right where we are right now. And thinking about looking at our instructional resources, the professional learning of teachers, our expectations for our building leaders, we're right there. So it's exciting, and I'll talk later about math is a little bit further down that journey, and I think you see that show up in some of the data. But I just want to recognize, reading is incredibly complex. And I would say, and I might need to apologize to some people, but I think it's more complex than math. When we're looking at all of the pieces that need to come together to help students learn how to read and all the pieces that go into literacy, it's really complex work. And I think I'm so proud of our district's achievements, and I don't think any one of us can look at our scores and think there's individual students and there's groups of students that need our more attention. But I just want to recognize there's an enormous amount of work that's been going along, and it's exciting to see the impact it's had and will continue to have.
So I am going to reflect back on 1999 because I remember I was a new teacher at Rose Hill Junior High in my induction experience, and our superintendent came, and her name was Karen Bates. She had short, pink, spiked hair at the time, and I recall her call to action was all students at standard, no exceptions, no excuses. And as I now sit here in 2025 as the superintendent of Lake Washington, I want to be mindful of the call to action, which really is every student literate by third grade. And what are the supports that we are guaranteeing and willing to bring alongside of our teachers? Because it isn't to call our teachers out, because we're asking our teachers to do something that's never been done. And so it's never about calling our teachers out. It's about coming alongside our teachers, bringing the supports in place so that they can accomplish this audacious goal that we have set for our system, which is every student literate by third grade. And so I remember feeling inspired by Karen and what she said to us, because it wasn't pointing fingers. It was saying, we need to do right by kids. Like, every student deserves to accomplish at standard learning. And so for us, a call to action to, in this instance, our early elementary educators isn't about calling them out. It's about coming alongside and saying the system is going to shift and change and support so that our students can have what they deserve, which is to be literate, which we know launches them into their educational career. So I was just sitting here thinking about that and reflecting on what it felt like as a new teacher hearing that. And now I'm the one asking our teachers to do something that has never been done before. And so I appreciate all of the work and articulation that goes into this, the work with our principals, because they are primary in supporting our teachers, our MTSS coaches, and all of the work that they do, identifying appropriate curriculum, like all of it plays out such that our teachers should feel a high level of support to work in the most complex arena, which is teaching people to read. Like, that is complex work. And so it's exciting work, and it's cool. It's an honor to think about doing this for the system. So just wanted to recognize that we are asking our staff to do something that is rigorous.
You didn't say it, I was gonna. I also want to point out some of the structural changes that we're making with some of the decisions we've had to make around budget is to reinvest funds in K-3 class size, and this is why. Because we believe if we can repurpose the funding that was originally intended to go there in the first place to reduce class size, that benefits all students, particularly the students that are not meeting the standard that we've set for ourselves.
And it makes all the other work of the system so much easier if students are literate. You know, again, I'm watching this play out right now with my own kid. Of everything gets easier, and so that investment early on really pays dividends throughout life and also educational careers.
Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? Thank you so much for being here, Director Pease, and answering all of our questions. Since there are no other agenda items, the February 10th, 2025 study session is now adjourned at 6:33. Thank you.